So, welcome, John. Welcome for the second appearance. It's a pleasure to have you here. How are you?
Hey, I'm fine. I'm fine, and it's I, I hope your people are ready to laugh at the same jokes. But anyway, here I am for a second time.
Perfect. It's a pleasure to have you here. So, John, tell us a bit about your background, about yourself, for people to understand. Who is John?
Sure.
What you've been up to, and what is your program and project that you're doing in the giraffes?
Yeah, sure. The bumper sticker, the short version of what I tell people of about my life is I'm lucky to be alive. My whole first half of my life was one hair-raising adventure after the other. I was either climbing big, dangerous mountains. I mean, I have a history as a mountaineer, but then I was in the Foreign Service, but not the kind of for the American government, and I wasn't in the part that dealt with fancy embassies and cocktail parties in Europe, but rather with wars and revolutions and jungles and deserts. So I was shot at, and I was chasing Viet Cong, or KGB agents were chasing me, or whatever. And the upshot of it was that by the time I was in my late 30s, 40 or so, I had faced a violent death at least a dozen times. So I've come away from all that with a whole lot of stories. Then, to make a long story short, which I told in the kind of the first podcast we had, but to make that long story
Yeah.
short, I suddenly realized, and I didn't. I wish I'd done it sooner, but I didn't. I was almost 40 years old, in my late 30s. I suddenly realized that a life that was just focused on me, on having adventures, was a pretty shallow life. I wasn't helping anyone. And point of fact, I was making the world a worse place because I was either starting or stopping wars and revolutions, whatever my government wanted me to do. And it suddenly caught up to me that that was a pretty shitty way, that was a pretty awful way to live a life. I had a heart. I wanted to do some good in the world. And so I began to turn my life around. The key point, which I described in that earlier podcast, was a battle in Vietnam where I really got slapped across no, not literally. I mean, I got a realization in that battle in Vietnam that I needed to change my life. And so I did. It took me a while. I'm a slow learner. And it took me a while to gradually turn my life around and use whatever skills I had, whatever resources I had, to actually make the world a better place instead of a worse place. And I found myself at the United Nations, where I had a great opportunity to do that, including helping end apartheid in South Africa, for example.
Sure.
And then the key thing is, for the last 42 years, I and my partner, Ann Medlock, have been working together on something called the Giraffe Heroes Project. Now, the Giraffe Heroes Project is not about animals. We use it because in English, the metaphor sticking your neck out means to take a risk. So we're looking for risk takers, giraffes, if you will, long necks, people who are sticking their necks out. And they could be men and they're women and even some young people. And of course, they're every color in the rainbow in every country on the planet. And they're of every walk of life, but they're taking risks to make their world a better place. Maybe it's just their communities. Maybe it's some huge issue like sustainability and global warming. But in any case, these people are doing extraordinary things, and we make them famous. We tell their stories over social media, and in that way inspire others to follow their lead. So we're kind of doing what people have been doing for 10,000 years, since I guess, like Neanderthals were dancing around the campfire, telling the stories of their heroes in order to get other people in their populations to be heroic. Well, that's what we do. We find heroes, tell their stories at the Giraffe Heroes Project, and inspire other people to get off their rear ends and take on whatever challenges that they see. And in the 40 years we've been doing this, we've started a whole program for schools. We're all over the world. We have affiliates in Africa and Asia. And we're still going strong because there's a huge number of heroes out there. You can find the stories of over 1,500 of them at giraffe.org. I urge our viewers to go there.
Sure.
Giraffe.org. And they can see in the nav bar how to get there into these stories. So that's who I am. I fell into a kind of a deep hole as a young man, looking just for adventures, and I had plenty of them. And then basically I turned my life around and used my adventurous spirit and whatever other skills I had to help make the world a better place, in particular now through the Giraffe Heroes Project. So there, I've already talked too long, but there we are. I hope that's enough of a summary to get our conversation today started.
Very nice introduction. So, John, can you tell just a bit resumed what happened inside lately the Giraffe Project? I mean, what stories can you mention lately that you guys have done?
Well, hold on just a second here. I'm going to dial up a couple of them. Yeah. I'm looking at the Giraffe Project page, for example, and I'm reading right off it. Here's one that we put up 6 months or so ago. I'm reading now. Despite the mountains of paperwork thrown at her by bureaucrats and the threats and actual attacks from those whose profits she endangers, Sumaira Abdullahi has championed the well-being of her fellow residents of Mumbai, India, mobilizing thousands of them to protect the environment and lower pollution. Abdullahi's organizing has made Mumbai safer and quieter. Here's another one. A U.S. Marine veteran and Veterans Administration drug abuse counselor, Brandon Coleman, blew the whistle on Veterans Administration mistreatment of patients. After years of harassment, he was hired by a group within the Veterans Administration that protects whistleblowers. He found things going wrong there, so he blew the whistle on them. No matter that he has to endure, Coleman will go on championing his fellow veterans. And finally, here's a third one. When she was just 8 years old, Marie Copani wrote to then President Obama, asking him to help the Flint, Michigan's toxic water problem. He visited her, and over $100 million followed for the repairs of the Flint, Michigan, USA water system. Marie went on to be a tireless activist against bullying and ethnic discrimination, and for the environment and immigrants' rights. She's raised money, distributed school supplies, founded organizations, and inspired other children to challenge authorities. And then it gives her website. So anyway, that's 3 out of 1,500.
Very interesting stories.
I can obviously go on all day, but I can, as our discussion today proceeds, we can return to this, and I can read a few more stories from time to time as we proceed. But these 3 stories, an adult woman, an adult man, and a teenager, an adult woman, an adult man, and a teenage girl, sort of give you the breadth of the kind of person we're looking for. So we tell stories of these 3, and we put them up on our website and social media, and reach a lot of people. We reach millions of people. And over 42 years, I think we can safely say that we have engineered and promoted and supported change actions all over the world. Thousands of them, at least thousands of them. We don't hear about most of them because heroes don't normally look back. So, but we get a lot of mail and we get a lot of reaction. So we know we're on the right track. And basically we're doing what people have done, like I said, for thousands of years, since cavemen. Everyone understands
Wonderful.
that if a culture wants to change itself, wants to change its people, it doesn't really work so much to preach at them. What works is storytelling. So we are storytellers. And through our storytelling, we move people to stick their own necks out and solve problems.
Wonderful stories. I think everyone that may be listening or will listen in the future will be wondering about the wonderful things that this supports to society, and also what has been helping to the people in general with such actions, which is required in these days, because people most times are afraid to sometimes make some actions because they don't find any support out there. and this is very relevant in such case. So, John, we talked about already briefly regarding this. So, what do you think that still needs to change? I mean, what will be your ideas for a global change, let's just say positively?
Yeah, it's difficult times, isn't it? I mean, the whole world seems topsy-turvy. We just had an election in the United States, which is going to change things huge, not just for the United States, but for the world. So things are constantly moving and shifting, and it's important to stick by your basic principles. And as far as I'm concerned, what's most important, and I preach this and say this all the time, is to find the meaning of your own life. What makes your own life meaningful? What is it that's truly in sync with your deepest passions and your deepest sense of who you are? And what I found out from my own life, and I found it out from the 1,500 people we've honored as giraffes, because they all sort of think this way, is that the most basic source of meaning is some kind of service, some kind of giving back. So I ask people and I challenge people, and I'm not just talking about people that voted for the Democratic Party in America 2 nights ago. I'm talking about the ones who voted for Republicans, and I'm talking about the right wing and the left wing in France, and I'm talking about people in African villages, and I'm talking about whatever, people everywhere, to look around and see what needs doing. Find the problems. The problems are everywhere. And it doesn't matter whether you're a right winger or a left winger. If you have a problem with pollution, for example,
Yeah,
and global warming,
it's
and
just general. I mean, isn't it? I mean, pollution affects everyone. It's just that it needs a required action.
well, exactly. I mean, people in the coast of Florida are suffering from sea level rise, just as the people in the South Pacific. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's everywhere, and wildfires and more intense storms and stuff affect us all. And not only that, but if you weren't affected enough, we can all see what's happening, going to happen in the next 20, 30 years, massive migrations from the equatorial regions further north or south, as it becomes absolutely impossible to live in some of the areas around the nation's equator. You just can't live when it's Fahrenheit 125 degrees every day.
Of
It's
course.
so we're going to be faced with a huge increase. You think it's bad now. We think it's bad now with hurricanes and tornadoes and typhoons and wildfires. I mean, look what happened in Spain. Gee,
Yeah. Yeah.
we read with. I couldn't believe that. This is not California. This is Spain, and
Yeah.
a whole hunk of Spain is on fire. It's like, what? Spain? Are you kidding me? No, not. So it's everywhere, and it's going to get worse, which means that we have to stay steady. We have to stay calm, and the best way I know to do that is to keep focusing on what makes your life meaningful, and then to pursue something, to pursue an action, to pursue relationships, in order to try to solve whatever part of the problem you can solve. If you're in Spain, for example, and you're near where the wildfires have been burning, well, what is there about in Spain that you can do? For example, maybe you need a new forestry policy in Spain, or you need to spend more federal money, more national money in terms of fireproofing areas of Spain that are now in greatest danger. Or maybe you simply need to educate Spaniards about the dangers of global warming, because this has never happened in Spain before.
Yeah.
Now it is.
I mean, there are some situations. For example, down in the south is also fold out ice of the size of tennis balls. In down in the south, and now it went to the up part, which is Valencia, and it rained so much that everything is still flooded and out of.
Right.
I mean, out of service. I mean, I know some people there. Luckily, they are fine. We talked; they're fine. But the services, the roads, everything is disrupted. There's practically everything is stopped until it's get clean and removed, etc. So what people need to be conscious about is, why did it happen? Well, it happened because we have a problem that apparently is not being taken care of for many years, which is global climate. And the actions that are done are not enough to actually do some positive action. So consciously, I think there's one thing that is important for everyone to know, and this is not specific country, talking about worldwide. We need to be much more conscious on what is needed to be done, what should be done in action, and how to enforce it. Because we're not talking about having a time that we have some time now to get some action and preface and go forward, but we are talking about immediate action. We need immediate action, because at this point the situation is progressing negatively, and is needed to be reduced in order to get self-contained and to get better. So I think, yeah, you reach a point that self-consciousness is definitely one of the biggest parts that it's needed. But of course, but also governments need to support their actions to move forward.
Yeah, well, let's look at a real problem that's going to hit us next February or March. Almost certainly, President Trump will again withdraw the United States from the Global Climate Accord, which means that the burden of fighting climate change will have to fall upon everybody but the United States in terms of the international organizations. What does that mean? It means that a whole lot of people in Europe have got to realize that their responsibilities have become even more important, because the United States is not going to be a player. 2025 for maybe 4 years through the Trump presidency, he really doesn't give a damn. And there are a whole lot of American NGOs and stuff who will always be active, bless them, the Sierra Club or whatever. All of our non-governmental organizations will be ramping up their actions, but there won't be U.S. government action, which has to be replaced. Maybe China can step up into the void and become the global leader in fighting climate change. I mean, stranger things have happened. And after all, the Chinese are way ahead of the rest of us in terms of solar panel construction, for example, and other aspects of fighting global warming, even though they are the world's biggest or second biggest polluter. So maybe it's some new rapprochement with China around climate change that the rest of the world has to come to grips with. Maybe it's simply electing more leaders in those countries who are really concerned about climate change. I mean, people like, for example, the leader of the American state of California. California, of course, is bigger than most nations of the world. But Governor Newsom is a huge champion for climate change, and California has been a world leader in fighting for sane climate policies. Well, maybe other nations need to look at their own leadership. What I'm saying is that this is a great chance, a great opportunity.
Yeah.
For ordinary people and for government officials in the next 4 years, because the U.S. is going to be absent for the next 4 years, to really pick up the ball, using that English phrase, to really grab the initiative in terms of moving forward toward that 2% target, so that we can keep the world a livable place for our great-grandchildren. So this is a great thing to talk about, because that's exactly what we're talking about. To do this, you're going to have to stick your neck out.
Yeah.
If you are a quiet politician not wanting to make waves, well, maybe now you need to be not so quiet. Maybe now you need to start making waves. Maybe now you need to get up and make an impassioned speech in your country's legislature or parliament. Maybe you need to raise some huge amounts of money. I don't know, but it's something that's got to happen, and it's going to take brave, committed, visionary people to do that. Are there enough brave, committed, visionary people on the planet to do that with the U.S. on the sidelines? Well, God, I hope so. I hope so. I think so. But they're going to have to prove themselves. They're going to have to step up. They're going to have to stick their necks out. And I'm talking now to every single person watching this. I don't care if you're not a government official. You're a citizen of somewhere. And there's something you can do, even in your hometown. Maybe it's, for example, increasing the amount of electric buses on your city streets. I mean, it could be something very small, very limited, but you're doing your part.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I mean, I don't want to get this too political, but what, for example, what would you say to current politicians regarding to enforce legislations in the matter of to help climate change? Because
I think, sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't mean
because I mean we've been seeing a lot of political changes according to climate change, but in the end, they don't actually well enforced or not well enforced enough.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, the primary thing is greenhouse gases, is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the fact that I think no nation has met its targets. I don't know of any nation that has met its targets, its Paris targets. But
I
that's
don't think he had. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But that's where it's key. I mean, as long as we don't deal with significantly lessening the gases that make the world warmer, it doesn't take a brilliant person to figure out that we're going to lose, that the climate will get worse, and that our great grandchildren are really going to suffer, even if we're dead and gone by the time the worst effects of climate change happen. At a certain point, the Ross Ice Shelf is going to fall off Antarctica, and when it does, the glaciers in Antarctica are going to slide into the sea and melt. And now we're talking about sea level rises, not in centimeters, but in much bigger. I mean, a lot. In the other system, it's feet. We would expect a sea level rise around Florida of at least a foot, for example, if the Ross Ice Shelf melts out and the glaciers in Antarctica start to move into the sea. And of course, we have Greenland, which is a similar situation. And that could very well happen. And we need to prepare for that. But the biggest thing, as you have pointed out, is what do leaders do now? And I think the focus was lots of focuses. It depends on the country, but certainly a major focus established by the Paris Accords is the reduction of greenhouse gases. And there, I think the world has been doing, at best, a mediocre job.
I agree on that. The best mediocre job is actually true because I mean we know, for example, Kyoto Protocol exists for dozens of years. We know that Paris mandate, exists for many years too, and since then we still not see any significant changes. Yeah, and this is what we've been talking about. If you want to progress and make change, you need to take the correspondent action. So papers are signed, but in the end, there's no action. So what's the point having the paper signed? So that's what I'm getting at. And the other part is what I always say is we all live in the same planet. Whatever you're not doing or you're doing negatively will affect you also. So why not moving forward positively and making this at least to live for next generations? That's what I always say. So I mean, from my side, I think my advice is take action. It's not. I mean, we're not talking about just sitting, sign a contract, and make a public speech in front of TV, but also follow it through and make the action out of it. Because I mean, you have to. I mean, it's not. We're not talking about what is public opinion, or the way we are now. If we don't have action, this will, get worse and worse year by year, and it's not something that we can look to the other side.
Mm. Indeed, and also it's about money. Let's face it, Julio. There are a lot of people who are making a lot of money on fossil fuels, the extractors of oil and gas, coal, for example. And there are a lot of countries who, for very good reasons, are avoiding the massive increase of expenditures of changing away from a fossil fuel country, from for example, dependence on coal. And looking more at wind farms and all the rest of the alternative agencies, and maybe even reviving nuclear energy. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people have different views on that, but there are. It's about money, and that's what Donald Trump has said. I mean, the reason he views the Paris Agreement as a bad deal for the United States because it's going to cost us a lot of money. It means perhaps shutting down our most polluting power plants and putting even more money into solar and wind, for example. And he just is not prepared to do that. But he's not alone. He's not alone. And some countries can't. I mean, for example, South Africa. South Africa is primarily burning coal. Why? Because they have a whole lot of coal and it's very cheap. And South Africa, while it's doing relatively well for a country in the global south, it's not a rich country. So the idea of a massive expenditure on alternative energy is just not going to happen in South Africa. So, they're going to be.
I agree with you in that subject, yes, but there are things that they are willing to invest money in things that will make a positive change, but everyone is investing a huge amount of money in weapons. So in the end, if you control all the money that is actually spent worldwide in weapons, I think the climate change will be already resolved. So this is one issue also. It's very controversial, but I mean it's sort of this reality. And it's something that obviously should change also.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. We probably even should have brought it up before. And in terms of finances, I mean, how much money has the war in Ukraine cost, for example? Not just, across the board. I mean, all the countries involved, and how much money has the situation in the Middle East cost? I mean, the rebuilding of Gaza is going to cost, I don't know what, billions, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. All of which could go into, wind farms and solar panels and in the Gaza, in the Middle Eastern deserts.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a question of what we spend our money on. And right now, countries, in particular my own country, which has, I think, the highest defense budget per capita on the planet, needs to do something about that. And we're not about to do that as long as we feel insecure in the sense of having to protect ourselves by having a massive Navy and a massive Air Force and a huge nuclear arsenal and all the rest of it. But even smaller countries, I mean, now there's talk of other countries in Europe developing their own nuclear weapons programs because they're afraid Donald Trump will withdraw the U.S. from NATO and therefore the nuclear umbrella. And so wouldn't it be interesting if Spain and Italy, for example, start putting massive amounts of money into developing nuclear weapons? I mean, who knows? But in any case, your point, that weaponry is a foolish alternative expenditure to what is really killing us, or more likely killing our great-grandchildren. Is where the real danger lies if only people would look ahead. Which brings me to a question we spent a lot of time on in our last session, and that is the necessity of creating a positive vision of looking ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the positive vision? Is it a vision where we just lurch from one war to the next? I mean, Ukraine and Gaza 1 year, 15 years from now, it's, I don't know what, some other place on the planet, some other places on the planet.
My big question, in the end of this is why. The why behind that. Why wars exist? Why do they have to go to war? Because I mean, normal people can sit on a table and they can talk. I mean, I don't think it's necessary to reach that far. In the end, yes, I mean it's very controversial. In the end, it's each other people opinion. But one thing for a fact is that weapons, we always harm human beings and nature, so that's not beneficial in any way. And the second part is why spend so much on weaponry? Because of course, if you spend so much on weaponry, it's to use it. But why you should use it? And it goes to that. So I mean, we did some accounting. Just I think between the last 2 years, globally was spent more than $2 trillion just in weaponry, and what is it for exactly? That's the end result. What result will global population will get from that? And the lives that we're taking in out of this planet, and what was it for? What was the reason for? And this is something that people in the end don't have the answers. I mean, what do you think about it?
Well, I think there's an irony here, Julio. Um, the irony is that the threat of warfare is going to be greatly enhanced as migration pressures increase. As the equatorial middle of the planet becomes more and more unlivable, Europe will see migration pressures way in excess even of the excessive pressures it now faces, of people streaming north into more livable climates from Africa and the Middle East. The US will face similar increases in pressure, not so much because of climate, but nonetheless, it's affiliated too. And that's the irony. I mean, I'll say one thing for the US Defense Department, our Pentagon. A couple of years ago, I guess maybe under Obama, they did establish an office to examine the effect of climate change on warfare. And they came to the conclusion that I've just been talking about, that the worst climate chaos becomes, the higher the rates of migration. The higher the rates of migration, the more tension there is between the global north and the global south. The more that happens, the more revolutions there will be.
Yeah.
The more riots and dislocations there will be in Europe. And
Instability.
and just to finish my point, what will that do? It will increase the power of right-wing autocrats who will step forward in Madrid, in Paris, in Bonn, and say the only way we can protect our country is to fight, to develop more armed forces, to develop more weaponry. And that's the irony, that climate change itself is a huge incitement to the kind of wars that nations are now fighting, and they will see a lot more violence as desperate people stream north because they have no place else to go. Either that or die. I mean, what would you do if faced with that situation? See your family die or take the risk of going across the Mediterranean in a leaky boat?
Exactly. But the point is, why create that situation? This is what I'm getting at. Because all politicians are very aware when wars are created, how the weaponry are used, how is it exchanged. But in the end, I don't see a proper regulation regarding it, no one actually seems to be on a diplomatic path. Because if it was a diplomatic path, we wouldn't have so many conflicts around the world. I mean, right now we can count at least 5. I mean, how we got to that? Because I mean, what happened to the people? Why cannot just sit down and have a conversation and do formal, diplomatic conversation. This is what I'm getting at. I mean, what did we lose, in time? Because I think there was many faculties, especially on many politicians, that they lost because they were unable to do everything according diplomatic way, like sit down and have a conversation. Why you need to prove yourself that you have higher force, or you want to prove to the world using force? I mean, what is the point in that?
Well, it's I was an American diplomat for 15 years, so I'm pretty well aware of the pushes and pulls on statespeople around the planet. And you ask, why isn't there a diplomatic path? Why don't people just get together and solve it? Well, I think we know the answers to that. We've talked about them already, some in this own conversation today. There are financial pressures. There are political pressures. There is lethargy. There are unscrupulous people and autocrats who are going in the opposite direction. So that's why the diplomatic path is not working. If anything, there isn't enough public pressure. How do you create public pressure? Because I've come to that conclusion that governments are never going to solve this. It's kind of what you're saying. The governments are just not going to solve it. The diplomatic path isn't going to work. It's only going to respond to public pressures. And the public pressures simply aren't extreme enough. And the public pressures will come from publics. They will come from individual people demanding change. And that's where we get down to what the Giraffe Heroes Project is all about. It's getting individual people in Spain and the United States and Russia and Moldova and every place to understand that they have power if they get together and create a vision for change, and then get enough people behind it to force the changes in whatever governments they've got, even the most autocratic ones, even the most fearsome autocrats will have to respond if there's massive public pressures. And the public pressures come from individuals. Again, we'll go back to what I was saying 20 minutes ago. Individuals who are doing small things like getting more electric buses on their streets, or some new regulations to limit wildfires around their cities, or whatever. Getting people energized about what they can do is the only way to put enough public pressure on countries so that when they do collect and there are diplomatic paths, the diplomatic paths mean something. They aren't just, as you're suggesting, a charade, that they'll do something, and that there is a real chance to solve it. But in this case, the people will lead and the leaders will follow. I mean, that's the principle right now on climate change. The people lead, the leaders must follow. And we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We blame
No, I think we're very far away from that. I think in many countries, because people are afraid to talk, because of restrictions made by their own governments, and in some other ones is because they see it all the time on news, and there is not a movement telling them what is the correct path for them to come forward and starting to hear their voice. Because in the end, I think the main problem in all this is, why should I come forward to talk? I mean, I'm going to be alone because no one's talking, right? So, I mean, we need to start removing that concept. But for that, of course, there needs to be a movement for people to follow, in common sense, and say, this is the way that you need to put your voice out, to start making pressure to get positive resolution, for example, for the climate change. Of course, we can talk about many, many subjects. It's not just the climate change. There's a huge amount of subjects that, needs to be changed. But I think that's the main fact. Like I said, in some ways, people are afraid to talk. And in some other ways, people don't know how to move forward, because there's not a proper movement guiding them, I think, with a proper path and guidance, at least as information, for them to actually feel comfortable that moving forward and say, I want to change this. And more people get around to, and follow and get, to get a big cloud, let's just say, of people that we actually start, doing something on pressure. I just say positive pressure to government to start resolute. But like I said, in some countries we have the negligence of most of them, that actually putting in power policies for people even to be afraid of talking. So this is the controversial part of the whole thing. Some countries actually try to do policies that they want to say that are doing sustainable way, but in the end, internally, they have policies to make people afraid to talk. So where are we at? This is
Yeah.
my question.
Yeah. Well, you point out there's not a proper movement. Now, you're right. But the question is, the only way to get a proper movement is to start it. And that's what the Giraffe Project is all about. A
Yeah,
lot of the people that we honor as Giraffe Heroes, they don't just get up and give a speech, or they don't get up and just try to do something by themselves. They start movements, and
sure.
that's what we need more of. We need more people who are brave enough to start movements, and if that means getting knocked down and put in jail because they have an autocratic government, well, so be it. After enough of them are in jail, maybe the ones after that will finally succeed. But there's got to be a bottom-up movement. And let me the story that resonates with me. It's a common story. I think most people in the world will know the outlines of it. But it's about the necessity of creating a movement from the bottom up. And this is about American civil rights, the rights of Black people in the United States, which, as we all know, under regulations in the first part of the 20th century, Black people had very few civil rights. They were largely kept from voting. They had to use separate restaurants and water, all that stuff that happened in the 1940s, 1950s, whatever. And there was an undercurrent there because the government wasn't doing a damn thing. Even under progressive presidents like Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, and otherwise good people like Dwight Eisenhower, our presidents, our leadership, they didn't do anything either because there was a huge problem. And it was centered in racist senators from the American South and the North. There was a lot of pressure to keep things as they were and not shake the boat. Never mind the fact that a great segment of our population, that is to say, Black people, African Americans, were suffering mightily. So what happens? You get people, Black people, African American people, who develop their own leadership. And one of the most impactful leaders, of course, was Martin Luther King. What did Martin Luther King do? First of all, he started small. He started small by energizing people to go into individual restaurants and sit at the wrong tables until the cops came and threw them out, or people punched them or whatever. And he was smart enough to know that media would cover this. And when the southern states overreacted and began sending vicious dogs and fire hoses to put down Black people on their demonstrations, Martin Luther King and his allies made sure that these pictures went on newspapers all over the country. But the biggest thing I want to say is that what really began to change things in America regarding civil rights began with one famous speech that Martin Luther King gave in Washington, D.C., in which his most quoted line was, "I have a dream."
Yeah,
And he
definitely.
said, "I have a dream." And the dream was of Black people and white people finally sitting down on a table of equality and even fellowship. And that would change things. And people laughed at him. But then when he said that, it began to catch on. And my point is this. When he said, "I have a dream," what he was really saying, in my words, was, "I have a vision. I have a vision for change." And then he outlined that vision of an America where Black people had full civil rights, voting rights, education rights, school rights, all of that. He outlined that, and at a point when it didn't exist. That's what a vision does. And that's what we need now in terms of climate change. We need visionary leadership to create a picture of a world in which that 2% target is reached, in which ordinary people demand reductions in greenhouse gases and demand that their countries begin using more renewables. Doesn't happen yet, but you
Yeah.
have to create the vision first. And that's what Martin Luther King did. And America obviously still is not perfect in terms of civil rights. But because of Martin Luther King, we passed the Voting Rights Act, we passed the affirmative action, we passed
There
all
were
things.
significant changes, of course. I mean,
And
through that, many things happened.
yeah, that's my point. That's my point. You ask why we need a proper movement. Well, the proper movement sure as hell isn't going to start in Spain's parliament, and it sure as hell isn't going to start in the American legislature. It's going to start by individual Spaniards and individual Americans looking for leaders like Martin Luther King, or maybe becoming those kinds of leaders themselves, and then moving forward to create that irrepressible political force, even if in the beginning many of them suffer, are jailed, or whatever. Of course, people don't want to be alone. So part of this activity has got to be organizing. It's got to be creating teams of people. So because the more people there are, I mean, when Martin Luther King gave that speech and said, "I have a dream," there were like, I forget, but like 200,000 people in front of him
Yeah.
on the Mall Park in Washington D.C. And that was a great start to his movement. He created a mass movement because nobody wants to be alone, because they're just cut down if you're alone. So you need to create a mass movement. And now you've got social media, which, if used powerfully, can help create that mass movement. And that's where we need to go.
So, John, if there was a sit down today, let's just say, and you were sitting down in a table with all representatives of all countries, what would you tell them for a positive change?
I would talk to them. Let's assume also that the people around that table did not agree with me, that they were leftists and rightists and firm proponents of fossil fuels and firm opponents of fossil fuels, proponents,
Yeah.
whatever. I would look for the common ground by talking about our grandchildren and our great grandchildren, and creating a vision of a world of how it might look in 2090, 2090, 2080. What does the world look like for your great grandchild? You know, he or she isn't even born yet, but you have grandchildren who will be the parents. What does the world look like for your own family
Yeah.
living on a planet where nothing is done and the 2% targets are not met? In point of fact, is 2.5%, maybe even close to 3%. And migration pressures are causing wars all over the place. And wildfires are burning even in Iceland. I mean, what does that look like? Your own grandchildren and great grandchildren will be living there. Okay, let's create a different vision. Let's create a vision of 2080 and 2090 where that doesn't happen. Let's create a vision where migration pressures have eased, because the richer nations of the world have finally decided to put hundreds of billions of dollars into reforestation projects in the Sahel in Africa, and other projects to minimize the effects of climate change. Let's look at all the positive things that could be done now that would create a world for your great grandchildren in 2090, which is livable. I mean, they don't exist yet, but you'd love them if they did. Your grandchildren exist and you love them, and that's the direction they're heading in. So how does that look? Which world would you prefer? Which world
Yeah.
would you prefer? And you begin to get agreement on a basic vision. Now, of course, that doesn't mean solutions. Agreeing on a vision does not necessarily mean agreement on individual policies.
I mean,
Uh,
I would say it's a start. I mean, firstly, I think the main important thing is for everyone to agree. You know, is important our grandchildren. So if they all agree, of course, then it's starting to study what is the next step of action. You know, so but we need to get there, and
yeah,
we
and
don't
if
need
you
to
start,
quit.
If you start right now by going up to each country and saying you need to double or triple your expenditures in fighting climate change, they will point out to you that the economy is in tatters and you need to spend that money on, I don't know, medical healthcare programs or whatever other worthy causes, or you need to spend it on your country's weaponry because you're a threat. No, if you deal with climate change by shouting at people to fix the here and now, you're going to go no place, which is where the Paris Accords has kind of gone. Minimal progress. So you've got to get beyond the pressures of the here and now, because you will always kick up opposition. You need to create a vision that looks at the world 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now, and try to get people to understand the links between what happens in 2024 and how the world looks in 2080. You need to create those links. And that's where you create a vision. That's where you assemble the team so people don't feel that they're alone. But the worst thing you can do is scream at people now that they have to change tomorrow. It's just not going to happen.
No, I mean, doing it that way, it won't happen. But there is a but. I mean, if you can start somewhere, we're not talking about putting a date for tomorrow or the day after, but it has to start. At some point, all countries need to start cooperating and start in some point. And if they all do, even if it is 1% reduction, it's very significant worldwide. If all countries in the world reduce, even if it was 1%, it's a massive reduction that we're talking about. But they not even do 1%. This is what I'm saying. Why is it so hard to reduce even 1% in the country? This is my question.
Well, we've been talking about that for the last 20 minutes. It's hard because of competing economic pressures. It's hard because there's a whole lot of people that don't understand or don't agree with that climate chaos is a problem. They need to be educated. It's because a whole lot of people that are educated and that want to do the right thing feel that they're alone, which is your main point.
Yeah.
And so there's not a proper movement. Well, we need to create that proper movement. We need to create that proper movement. That's where I keep coming back down to. We need to create that proper movement, and that's from individual people sticking their neck out the way the Giraffe Heroes Project is urging people to do. And individual people do that. We need to find climate Martin Luther Kings all over the planet. That's what we need.
Yeah, definite.
Visionary figures, powerful visionary figures who can help us create that mass movement. And then the mass movement will have impact even on the most ignorant and vile autocratic leaders.
Yeah, definite. I think there's a great point there, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of Martin Luther Kings in the world. It's just a matter they need to come forward and start interacting and do it in positive way. You shouldn't be afraid to talk. You should come forward and start at least doing some action, because people need to understand whatever they do. If they do alone, it's very hard. But if we're talking about doing in millions of people, then we're talking about a different story. And government will have to listen.
Yeah. But talking about millions of people, I know your podcast has a whole lot of viewers. And I would hope that both of us together can encourage people to respond to this podcast, and that we get a conversation going of people with their own ideas. I mean, you and I mean, we're pretty smart guys, but we don't have all the answers. But I think we've explored today some excellent suggestions, some excellent paths, and I think we've described the obstacles pretty well as well. But what do other people think? I mean, creating a mass movement takes podcasts like this one, not just this podcast, but 100 podcasts like this one, and social media in the millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people on social podcasts. I mean, hell, I did something on TikTok yesterday for young people, and immediately I got 20,000 responses. I mean, it's amazing what can happen. Sure. And so people need to do more. People need listening today, need to be challenged. I hope they won't flick off their phones or tablets or computers when I say this, but they need to be challenged now to start action or to continue actions on climate change. And yeah, I hope they pick up on some of the suggestions you and I are offering. And God,
And the main thing that you already talked about, think about your grandchildren.
yeah,
That's the way of moving forward. You need to think about future generations, not just now. It's what happened after, and it continues. It's
yeah.
not like an ending movie. It's supposed to not finish. It's supposed to be continue and continue. That's the whole point. So if there will be more open people to understand this and really looking forward to have future generations, for sure, I think that will be some significant movement to for us to see the change.
And I think
So
we need to do, sorry, I was just going to say, I think we need to do this with confidence more than
yeah,
fear.
exactly, exactly,
Don't
exactly.
act out of fear, act out of confidence we really can meet this problem.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. And people should not be afraid in anyhow to do whatever they see it's positive to do. I
Yeah.
mean, if you want to talk, you just come out and talk. You don't be afraid of talking. That's what I mean saying. John, amazing. It's been already almost 1 hour talking. It's really great conversation as always.
Well, I hope.
So, as I always say, let's say a power message. What will be your power message today to everyone?
When the people lead, the leaders must follow.
Very good. I think it's the most powerful message that I have ever had in any episode. And it's very straightforward. I mean, if you look at it the way you said it, people should think about thoroughly and see that that's the proper way of moving forward.
Yeah. And create a vision. Create that vision of change. Put yourself forward to 2080, 2090, 2070, whatever, and create pictures, alternative pictures. One picture where climate change is unchecked, and another picture where we finally make the actions to check it. Compare those two pictures.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I hope for the everyone that will listen or will listen to the episode, I hope we made some clearance regarding at least as information how people should react at the moment where you had and how we should move forward, at least in a way. Of course, like John said, we don't have the answers, but this is a start. We have to start somewhere. So I think this is a positive way of people to know, what is out there, what are the options, let's just say, and what they should do. Let's hope that is positive change and a positive start for people to start doing, this movement.
And I would urge people to also distribute this podcast widely. I mean, I think it's going to be useful. I think we've done some good things in the last hour, and we need people to contribute, to answer back to us, to
Yeah,
create comments, and then to take this and put it on their own email networks. I will certainly do that. You give me the
yeah,
links
absolutely,
when you
absolutely.
finish the show. Give me the links, and I will put it forward through my whole entire social media network, and I urge other people to do the same. And it's one of those small things, like
Yes,
making a complaint of your town. Just taking this broadcast and getting it to 1,000 people that you know on your list. It'll make a difference.
it will. It will for sure, for sure. So, John, I appreciate it very much. It was a tremendous conversation. I really enjoyed it as always. And I hope that we still have a third conversation in some point in the near future.
And I hope that conversation reflects also a lot of audience feedback to this show, so we can then start talking about what people are telling us, points we missed, points that they think are not correct, points they
Yes,
loved. And we can continue from that basis.
absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate for having you here, John. Thank you, everyone, for hearing us. See you next time or next episode. See you.